when were you born, and what's the first memory that you can remember?
First memory of what?
That you can remember, that you can think of.
First thing I can remember in my life?
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. What the heck?
So
Out that my father had died when I was 8 years old. And that threw a big event into our lives. My mother was left with 3 boys. The oldest being 7. My little brother was about 5.
what were your, and what were they like?
First brother, the old brother was named Robert Dircks. The younger brother was named Bruno Dircks. And
Did you like
Bruno
them?
died, let's see, this is about 4 years ago. He was younger than I, but he had a sad life. Lost 2 wives, same problem, brain cancer.
So do you remember your childhood home?
A what?
Your childhood home.
Childhood home?
Yeah.
Well, up till the time my father died, we lived in Pelham Manor, New York. After that, we had to move over to an apartment in Riverdale, which is in the Bronx. And we stayed there 1 or 2 years. I went to a public school, public PS 181, which was a good little school. I guess I got out of there in 2nd grade. And then we moved to Palisades, New Jersey, and lived with my grandfather and grandmother in a big rambling house overlooking the Hudson River. And we stayed there. I went to grammar school, junior high school, and high school, Cliffside Park, New Jersey. From Cliffside Park, New Jersey, I went to Fordham University, entered in 1947, and had to work to get the tuition and everything, so I worked part-time in various companies, including a publishing company where I operated, and I didn't know how to operate the machine. It was called an addressograph machine.
There's
sort of
another
worked
machine you can ask.
Which one?
So what did that machine do?
At that time, advertisers would basically address magazines put out by various organizations, and they would the publisher would sell the names of these series of names of various people getting various publications, so they would exchange, increase their publication list. My job was basically to load the little chips into the machine and unload it when they're finished. But since I was working the 3 o'clock to 11 o'clock shift and had to get up the next morning, I was not too attentive. Even though that, when I quit, when I told the foreman I had to leave, despite my clumsiness and dropping a couple of trays, he asked me to stay on because I was the only good worker he had. He had about 5 others. Then at Fordham, I was the student manager of the Fordham football team, and that's where I met the famous coach, Vincent Lombardi, who used to drive me home, or at least partly home, across the George Washington Bridge. And let's see, then entered
Do you remember anything about?
ROTC.
Do you remember talking to Vince Lombardi much, or anything he said ever stuck with you?
Vincent Lombardi?
Yeah.
What about him?
Could you tell us
Story.
about him?
What?
Could you tell us about him?
Oh,
or
about
anything?
Vincent Lombardi.
Yeah.
He was a coach at St. Cecilia's High School. And after the Fordham decided they were going to take up football again, they hired this relatively unknown coach from Englewood, New Jersey, Teaneck, New Jersey, and gave him a chance to be the freshman coach. He showed how coaching should be done. Took the freshman team and went undefeated, and the poor varsity team got beaten up by all the other teams. So Fordham then made him the assistant coach of the whole team, and he still continued to drive it. He was a rough customer with his players. Cursed them out, pushed them around, called them some ethnic names, and but they all loved him, and they all respected him, and they were all sorry to see him get enticed to a job up in West Point, where he became the assistant coach to Coach Red Blake. Then after all this, I graduated Fordham in June 1951 and got,
What did you study at Fordham?
I studied economics.
And then was that your favorite subject?
And what?
Was that your favorite subject?
It was the subject I thought was the most practical subject. I didn't want to study psychology, I didn't want to study history, I didn't want to major in English literature, I didn't want to major. But one of the courses I took at in high school, surprisingly, this was sort of during the war years, they did teach German. I took the undergraduate course in German at Fordham, and because we had to take a modern language. But I'll come to that point in a minute. I got commissioned as a second lieutenant in June, with the graduation. Got called to active duty in July. Got sent to an overseas processing point as a second lieutenant. And during the confusion of that setup, the word came out that the Air Force needed people who had any German in high school or college, and would they volunteer to spend a year at the University of Pennsylvania perfecting their German, and I volunteered, and for further reassignment to Germany, as opposed to Korea, which was a war going on. And they didn't even know what these brand new second lieutenants would do in Korea. So I had a job, went to through Pennsylvania, got my acceptance, later transferred to Germany, and I was stationed in various cities in Germany, Bremen, Frankfurt, Gießen, Hamburg, a couple of others, but
So what did they have you doing there?
I was then, here I am, now 22 years old. They put me in charge of an office in Bremen, and later transferred to an office in Hamburg, where I worked with the British Intelligence Agency. And we had a good relationship. And of course, at that time in Hamburg, I had the unfortunate problem of being evicted from the U.S. consulate in Hamburg, because the consul general thought intelligence was not appropriate subject for a U.S. consul to have a member of that intelligence group coming cash his checks. It was the only time I ever went to the consulate, once a month to cash my treasury check. British thought that was funny and assured me That's how Americans behave overseas a lot. They keep to themselves, and we found out to Vienna too. Anyhow, came back from Europe.
Well, he asked what you did there. You didn't explain.
Oh, I was what we were doing in Germany.
Yeah.
At that time, we didn't have spy ships. We had returning German prisoners of war, which were kept by the Soviets 6-7 years, and as after the war ended, they were still prisoners of war. Also, they were being returned. We wanted to find out where they had worked, what they had done, what interesting sights they had seen in their various work camps. We also were interested later on, when the war went up and the barriers went up, that how people got out of East Germany into West Germany. This was in case we wanted to had a war with the Soviets. We wanted to know if our ground crews and our flight crews could get back safely through various trails. So we had many German citizens working for us, but occasionally I'd have to sit in and ask some of the classified questions. Then what happened after that? We went back to the States. I was an ROTC instructor at Holy Cross College in Massachusetts, Worcester, Massachusetts, which you know quite well. And then transferred Air Force out to Montana at a Strategic Air Command base, where I was Director of Intelligence for an air division. But then I decided it's time to leave the Air Force, because at that time you couldn't really get to be above a colonel unless you were a flight crew. They've changed that since then. And then I got a position with the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. Came back east. Oh, wait a minute. I left the Air Force, became an assistant instructor or a teaching assistant with the University of California at Berkeley in the subject of economics. It was a PhD program. It was a difficult program because you had a lot of very, very, very bright students who were sometimes smarter than the instructor. It was a rigorous job, and I had to do my own PhD work, and I had to go teach these bright kids and deal with them. Then I got a job with the Atomic Energy Commission. Transferred back to New York, became the Director of Health and Safety Laboratory. Met your mama up there in Pelham, New York.
Grandma.
And we hit it off quite well.
Can you describe how you first met?
Your grandma, not your mama. And we hit it off quite well, got married in 1966, June 12th, 1966. And I remember that date.
Do you remember the wedding?
Then we had little Claire and Barry as our little children there. And I got moved to New York. I mean, from New York to, I was working then in Washington and married in New York. Then brought that little family down from New York. And let me see, what else happened? Well, we got along quite well. Lived in Bolton Road.
And you had a daughter at some point?
So what?
You had a daughter at some point?
We had a daughter. Much later on came little Elizabeth in 1970. we moved down there in 1966, and then 66, 67 we were there, right? Then along came Elizabeth. And of course, before Elizabeth came, Claire and Barry and I decided we needed a dog. So we drove out into the country and found a beautiful little Saint Bernard, 6 months old. Came back along, Rosie was sitting as a real estate agent, open house on Overley Street, and the kids jumped out of the car and announced that we now owned a Saint Bernard. It was greeted with less joy than we thought. They quite ready to not demand that we return the dog back to Virginia, but I think Rosie got accustomed to Lothar, and certainly Claire and Barry did. And then of course we had Lizzie, who was too young to appreciate, but she walked around the backyard, and the poor Lothar was trying to be friends with everyone, and wagging his tail knocked her off her feet several times. So that was then. Now what happened? And well, Claire got married. Poor Barry died. We moved out of Bolton Road.
I want to go back just a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite memory of Lizzie as a child? Of Elizabeth?
Lizzie as a child.
Yeah, do you have a favorite memory?
Well, she was a sweet little child. We all enjoyed it. Claire was a big help taking care of Lizzie. Barry had a particular affection for Lizzie and would be very, very kind and gentle with Lizzie. It was a good little family group. We'd all migrate to Rehoboth Beach, or Bethany Beach during the summer. We'd rented a house. We'd have Nana come down. We'd have the Maggios come down, Tia, Peter, and we dressed Lizzie. Lizzie had a so-called problem with her skin, that she was very susceptible to being sunburned, so we had to buy her a little bathrobe and a hat. And keep her out of the sun a bit. But all the kids enjoyed themselves. And then I shifted from job to job. What brought me down there? Atomic Energy Commission. Then I worked for the Department of Commerce for a while. Then I worked for
EPA.
Council on Environmental Quality, which was then a part of the Executive Office of the President. And the President was Nixon. And when the head of the council, Russell Train, moved from the council chairman to the administrator of EPA, I went along with him as his, what we call, chief of staff. And it was a good time. I enjoyed Russell Train. He enjoyed me. He wrote a very nice comment about me in his memoirs. So we, from that point on, what happened after EPA? What the hell I go
NRC.
back? Oh yeah, then the NRC called me down. See, I had worked for AC and knew a lot of people in the oh, that may be, you know who.
Yeah, don't worry, just keep
Okay.
talking.
Anyhow, they asked me to come down and become the deputy executive director of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Hi Lizzie, where are you?
And I stayed with them
Oh, goodness.
for many years,
Okay.
eventually winding up as the executive director.
That's terrific.
And then at
Have you
some of these
liked her?
receptions,
Really? Oh, I guess so.
Richard Kennedy, who had been a commissioner of the NRC, later became the Undersecretary of State for
Oh, good. Oh,
Nuclear
good. Really
Affairs,
good.
came and asked me
That is
whether I wanted to, what's this?
They did my, he did my